Hi, I'm Hal Kerfis. I'm Executive Vice President of Scalzo Commercial and New Development. And I should mention that we have a company that is made up of more than just that. It's a fully integrated company, including residential, commercial, property management, and even construction in the form of Westchester Modular Homes. So we can impart some information that would be of interest to a lot of people. But what we're talking about now is new development. That is part of our title, Scalzo Commercial and New Development. I thought it would be of interest. And we're talking as a broker, not a developer. We work with developers. We broker deals with developers. We work with them all the way through the process and try to come out at the other end with a positive outcome. And I'm, again, looking at it from the standpoint of people who might be listening to this, who perhaps are interested in looking at this field, getting involved in it, or whatever. So if you want to prepare yourself, let me give you some idea of my background and how I got into it. First of all, I was in the brokerage business, and I brokered all classes of real estate, from residential to, when I first started, that wasn't very long, to commercial and various types of things like office, retail, industrial, hotel, nonprofits, et cetera, et cetera. And that was both for sale and lease. Then I sort of volunteered. I sort of got interested in various community economic development type of activities. I was on Land Use Commission. I was chair of an Economic Development Commission on a municipal basis. I was chair of the Western Connecticut Economic Development Alliance. And I'm on the economics board for the Western Connecticut Council of Governments. And as well, I'm a co-operator of a regional bank. So all of these activities lend something to your knowledge, background, contacts, whatever it might be. It's very valuable. Now, you might have a different approach. You might want to approach it from a standpoint of a different educational background or whatever. But it's important to be able to learn a lot of details of the business and to meet a lot of people in the process. Now, however, within that business of development, there are certain areas that are more are hotter, that really are moving a lot faster. And because I have knowledge of those various other areas, I can probably pick and choose most of the time as to what area I want to spend most of my time in. The areas that are the hottest are multifamily and to some extent single family. Because those are needed types of things. We're underserved in terms of availabilities in those areas. We need more inventory, and this is the way of generating that. The second area that's just as hot is industrial. Now, under industrial, you're talking about mainly warehousing because of the people who are doing the online marketing. They need to get closer and closer to the marketplace. They need to have the warehousing on a regional scale and even on a local scale. Then the other area that's pretty desirable is self-storage, because a lot more people are going into apartments or smaller units, and they need some place to put their junk. Or important stuff, I shouldn't say just junk. One of the goals that you will have if you're in commercial new development is to decide whether you're not, again, from the developer standpoint, is to decide whether or not you want to get approved to build or just flip it. In other words, you're adding value during the approval process. It takes a long time. Approval processes can take a year or more. And so if you enter into a contract, you decide to get approvals on something, when you come out the other end and you have those approvals, then you've got something that's worthwhile. So let's say you, just to use a regular number, so let's say you buy something at $15,000 a unit, and you get approvals. It might be worth $20,000 to $25,000 a unit. So that's a very laudable way to approach this business. On the other hand, you might want to build it out, get approved, build it out, and then just basically go out, fill it up, and manage it at that point, just as a long-term asset. So once you decide to do whichever, then you have to consider the state of the market. Timing is very important. For instance, the state of the market right now is quite good for these activities. Excellent. Things are moving. And however, if you start to get approvals today, it might be a year from now before you get those approvals and you're able to start building anything. What is the climate going to be like a year from now? Is it going to be changed? Because this is a very cyclical business, so you have to realize that what's hot today may not be hot a year from now. So you got to think about that from the standpoint of near term and long term. You have to look at the strength of demand. As I said, housing and industrial are the strong categories right now. So that's good. But if you're looking at retail or office, you have to think a little bit deeper in terms of where you're going with that. There are development risks, no doubt, on anything that you do of a scale that a development encompasses. If you're talking about spending, let's say, $25 to $35 million or more for a build out of what you're getting approved, you're talking about a big risk, and you better make sure that you know all of the angles and know that you have a good chance of coming out on the plus side. Also, quality is important. You've heard the stories that Class A of anything is more desirable and fares well in a downturn. For instance, take a look at the mall situation. Right now, Class A malls, they took a hit, but they're doing quite well in the process. They're coming back. Class B and Class C malls, however, probably converting to something else, some other use. So again, go for quality if you can get it. And then, of course, rental or for sale. Do you want to build something that, like apartments that rents out, or do you want to build something like condos or townhomes that you can sell and then be out of it? If you go with the former, rental, you're pretty much, and if you want to stay with it, that is, you're pretty much confined to that property, and you have to spend a lot more time in terms of renting it out, maintaining it, etc. It also helps in terms of commercial real estate to know unit values. What do I mean by that? Well, each type of activity, each type of product, whether it be apartment, condo, townhome, cluster housing, single family, industrial warehouse, self-storage, whatever it is, you're going to have to know pretty much the values of those on a pre-approved basis as well as an approved basis. For instance, if you know that you can sell an unapproved apartment complex, let's say 100 units, just a round number, you can say, well, the price is probably going to be about $15,000 a unit to $18,000 a unit. Then when you get it approved, the price could be $20,000 to $25,000 a unit. And those numbers change all the time, so don't take them seriously. But that's the general thought and theme. So if you know these values, if you know what the difference is between condos and apartments or townhomes, and generally speaking, apartments are the less expensive of the three because you can get more density. If you're talking about condos, maybe a little less density, and townhomes, even less density than that. And of course, cluster housing is a different category altogether. So if you know these things, it helps you to be able to get a listing, put together the proposal to the developer, and then sell that proposal to the developer, and he will understand that you know what you're talking about. Because if you try to come in and say, well, okay, we're talking about $20,000 a unit, they're going to say, you're crazy. You just can't do it for that. And that, of course, brings you down in their estimation. So, again, there are other things to think about. Let's say you want to do a development for multifamily. You're going to have resistance to that. A lot of towns. In fact, I just had a meeting this morning, and I'm on a board for the region. Actually, the region most of Fairfield County and southern Litchfield County, and we were talking about this exact thing. Everybody's in favor of affordable housing. But, of course, the towns think of it as something that's bad. In fact, I was talking to a first selectman recently, and I mentioned affordable housing, and he says, ugh, ugh. So that's kind of the reaction that you'll get. But it's really not as bad as everyone says it is. The problem is exclusionary zoning. For instance, if you have... Let's say you have a quality developer and you would like to develop in a certain town because they have good education, they have all kinds of good things, nice things to enjoy, whatever. And you approach that town and they're going to say, no, we don't want multifamily here. And they don't have anything in their zoning manuals that even suggest that you could have it. So that's exclusionary zoning. So what do? Well, you might have to go with what they call State Statute 8-30G, which is affordable housing. Now, what happens there is that you basically are using the state's authority and clout to overrule the municipality that you're dealing with. The only way that the municipality can turn that down is to basically say that you have problems of safety or something akin to safety that wouldn't allow you to build it. And when they say safety, they're talking about you don't have sewer, you don't make it easy for the fire department to come in on an emergency basis, and therefore we have to turn you down. Well, if you have those things and you have the plan that says that, emergency vehicles can enter and exit, usually from one or two points of view, then you probably have a pretty good chance of getting that approved. And at the density that you need to make that project viable. For instance, if you go into a town and they say, yeah, we'll allow multifamily, but we'll only allow 5 units per acre. Well, you can't make that work on a plan and a payout. It just doesn't work. So what you try to do is to get as much density as you can. Of course, not to have it look bad, but density in terms of making it an economical package. and move it forward that way using something like an 8-30G. I've made applications in other towns where we try to play by the rules. If they give you a hard time, then sometimes you have to resort to that, and it has a lot of negative implications. But you have really no choice. So that is one way to get things done. The economy is another factor. You have right now a very, very good market. Things are going. There's interest. Developers are looking for land. They're looking for approved land more so than land that still has to be approved. But they're looking for land. And they have to consider things like inflation, which we have right now. Inflation is something that could get worse, probably will, but it may not last as long as you need to have it last if you want to build out. For instance, let's say it takes you a year to get approvals. What's going to happen during that year? Is inflation going to get bad or worse? Well, you might not care. You get your approvals, and then you start building out, and you can perhaps finish the thing at a timing when times are not as inflation prone. So again, there's a lot of moving parts on this thing. Interest rates, of course, go along with inflation. I mean, if you have inflation, you're going to have interest rates going up. That is not a good sign for any kind of development. But then again, they've been so low so that if they go up to, let's say, 5-6%, that's still below the long time interest rate in this country. I can remember years ago having a number of houses where the mortgage interest rates were 8.5%, and that was considered normal. So again, everything is relative, but you have to have a good climate in which to build in, or you're going to lose your shirt, actually. Supply chain, that's another factor. Prices have been going up. The prices of lumber and steel have jumped all over the lot. I mean, it's up one week, it's down another week. It's hard to plan with that kind of activity going on. Chips, another thing, which is not related to housing, but microchips, they have a tendency to slow down something like new car development. So if they don't have chips, these cars are very, very are marvels in terms of having capabilities compared to years ago, and these microchips are essential. I can remember I had, and this is just last year, I had a deal for a 50,000 square foot space for a new car dealer. It was ready to be signed, and then we had the microchip problem. What happened? Well, they had no chance of knowing whether or not they would be able to produce enough cars to make that location worthwhile. So we lost the deal. But that's how things happen in this business. You're up, you're down, you're sideways. Hopefully you come out on a level plane. In terms of mechanics and procedures, this is another story. Again, you have, if you're in this business, you've got to consider that you have to do things. And first of all, you have to find the raw land or a redevelopment property. When I say raw land or redevelopment, raw land is the primary way of going about. But after a while, good land becomes very scarce. So you might have to consider redeveloping a property, which means tearing down whatever is there and doing something new. So you have to find that as a broker of development projects. After you find it, you have to list it to sell, but you have to know all of the things I've mentioned before about values, what the opportunities for getting approval are, the myriad of things that you have to know. and have at your fingertips. You need value. You need knowledge of values, topography, slopes, wetlands, soil conditions, the availability of utilities, zoning, accessibility. I mean, that's a partial list, actually. But it's important because it makes things work if you know these issues and can read a map, can know when the property is too hilly or too wet to be able to build anything of value there. This is all important. And then, of course, you have to have a constant contact with developers. This is the relationship business, and unless you can have all the land in the world, but if you don't know who to sell it to or have these people in your pocket, it becomes very difficult. So that's an important part of the equation. Should you co-broke? Well, that is also a question. There are a lot of firms. The large national firms like Cushman & Wakefield and CBRE that have gotten away from co-broking. They feel that they can do it themselves and they don't need to give away half of their commission to do it. Sometimes it takes them a long time to do what they think they can do, but that's the way they're operating right now. So you have to make a decision as to whether or not you can sell it yourself, or do you need to co-broke? When I mean co-broke is basically you're dealing with another broker, and that other broker brings somebody to buy this thing, a buyer, and if it happens, and you at least make half the loaf. The procedure after you find a buyer is to, of course, make the deal. Usually requires a letter of intent from the buyer to the seller. And in that letter of intent, it spells out all of the details that you need to consider, that the seller needs to consider from the buyer that will make this deal work. It will probably have to be negotiated because they'll come in at a lower price than you want to achieve. But, that's part of the process. You negotiate it out. If it stays intact, you will usually have a due diligence period. That due diligence period can generally be anywhere from 60 days to 90 days. And that makes it possible for the buyer to really examine the property, the building opportunities, the zoning, the wetlands, the slopes, all of the other myriad details that get involved in the deal. And if at the end of the due diligence period he decides, well, this is a go, let's move on with this, or if he decides not to, well, then he gets his money back, his deposit back, and that's the end of it. But if he decides to go forward, usually, and sometimes the due diligence, during the due diligence period, a contract is drafted, which everybody sees and signs. And that contract will include more money down probably than the original period before the due diligence. At the LOI stage, you're usually putting in about 1% on large deals, and once the contract is signed after the due diligence period, it's probably brought up to about 5% as a deposit. Then after the contract, and within the contract, I should say, you have contingencies. And the contingencies are things like, can you get this approved? Another word for approved, by the way, is entitlement. And can you get it approved? And how long do you think it's going to take to get approved? And if that's the case, usually we're talking about 9 months to a year. And the reason we're talking that term is because you have to have public hearings on something that large. The public hearings tend to take, for a decision that is, somewhere between 9 months and a year. I should say, by the way, that in other states like New York and New Jersey, that process usually takes 2 to 3 years, and that's why I think we get a lot of developers coming up from those areas to see what they can do in Connecticut. It's a lot shorter process. It's a lot sharper process. So anyway, so you have your contingency, and that basically is something that is a guess. Okay, so you have, let's say, 9 months or a year as the contingency get approval. Well, what happens if things are going well, but you can't basically get the approval in that time period? You have to have a way out to be able to continue on without losing the deal. So usually a contract gives you extensions, and usually for extra money. Maybe it's hard money rather than soft money. So, but it's worth it because you feel pretty good about the project at that time, and you say, okay, I'll spend this hard money as long as it's applicable to the sales price. In some cases, you have appeal periods, and if that's the case, then you have probably quite a few months after that first approval period to try to get that approved. A lot of people don't have the stick with itness to do that, and they just give up the ghost at that point. But other people say, yeah, this is a good project. Let's move on, get it appealed if we can. And appeals are a lot easier, by the way, if you're dealing with the state under an 8-30G basis, affordable housing, that is, 8-30G, because the state will most likely give you a positive appeal. Site plans, which is part of the process in the beginning, can get quite expensive. You have engineer and legal costs, and they're called soft costs. There are other things involved, but those are the two major categories. And that can get, as I said, quite expensive. For instance, let's say you're going for an approval, and the actual cost of getting that approval is $100,000, $200,000, in some cases $500,000 or $600,000. That's a considerable amount of money to put on the line. But if you build it out, you're talking about, as I said, $25, $35, $40 million. So that's a small part of the actual expenditure. So you're taking a risk, but if you get approved, then you are lessening the risk in terms of the follow-through and building it out. Oh, by the way, as far as the various municipal commissions are concerned, you have things like inland wetlands, which a lot of people like to approach first, get that out of the way, because it generally takes longer than the planning and zoning process. And then you have planning and zoning. Sometimes they're separate, a planning function and a zoning function. Other times they're together as planning and zoning. And then you have a zoning board of appeals. Those are the major entities within any municipality that you'll have to be involved with in terms of development. The interesting part, a lot of people ask me, well, what about the boards themselves, the commissions? How are they to deal with? And the only thing I can say is it's sometimes chaotic. You have various types of people on boards. Realize that they're elective, but they are volunteer, and you have a lot of different motivations for people that go on land use boards. For instance, on the board makeup, my feeling is, after being on both sides of the fence, either as a commissioner and as an applicant, there are 4 types of categories that these board members fall under. One category is that, hey, they're really smart and able. They're good people, okay? Another category is that they're inexperienced, but they have good promise. Third category is they don't have a clue. I mean, they're dumb as a box of rocks. And the fourth category is that they're bullies. Now, you can take a couple of the latter types when you're making an application, and you can make it work. But if you have too many of the latter types when you're getting trying to get an approval, it can be pretty hairy. And on the bully types, they're the worst, because they might have a difficult time at work or even at home. They can't do anything right, and they get to be a commissioner, and they have all that power, and they love to wield it. But again, this is something you have to deal with all the time, and commissions change all the time. So you have to really keep up to understanding who's on it, what their thoughts are, what their inclinations are, et cetera, et cetera. And after we get all of this stuff done, usually close on the land maybe 30 days after the approvals, or permits. Permits sometimes are the second stage. You get an approval, but then you have to get a permit to build. So it can move fairly well when things go well. It can really drag out when they don't. You have a lot of risks in the process, but when they do turn out, they're very, very rewarding. This is an awful lot of detail, and of course, it might be a little daunting to some people in terms of getting involved with it, but basically it's very rewarding. There are a lot of moving parts. It takes a long time. Maybe you just have a few closings per year. Even one big one can be meaningful, but maybe you have a few. That's a great year. But on the other hand, if a deal starts getting problematical, you can have it all tumbling down, even after you've had a year or so under your belt. And all that work is lost. However, development is an entrepreneurial business. If you like the rush of achieving something big and are confident enough to tame the problems, you will like development. I love it. You need to have a thick skin and to be able to to roll with the process and the punches. So that pretty much wraps it up. We'll be doing other podcasts in the future on different topics. Hope you like this. Hope it gives you some information to proceed on whether or not to get involved in it. And all the best.